Hello, everyone. Welcome to Before I Die. I am Steve Willey. This is Yanana Rose Zovich. Before I Die is a monthly series about how death can help us live deeper, richer, and more meaningful lives, how it invites us to live deeper, richer, and more meaningful lives. The series, through this series, we're really hoping that we can inspire everyone to have an easier time talking about death and dying. And today, toward that end, we have with us hospice nurse Susan Quiñones. I'd like to remind everybody that this is a conversation. If you would like to join in that conversation, you can type into the comment section below, and we will get to those comments and questions as soon as we possibly can. I thought we'd just start by having Susan introduce herself a little bit and tell us just a teeny little bit about herself.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me today.
Sure.
So I graduated from nursing school back in the 90s, and I knew right away that I did not want to work in a hospital. It was all about doing home health and hospice work. So I started right out of nursing school back in the Appalachian Mountains.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was an adventure, and then came out here about 14 years ago, and I've been working for Wilshire since then. So,
Wow.
Yeah, I love what I do.
Yeah, well, welcome to Before I Die, Susan. I think this is a conversation, we're talking today about how, what happens to the body at the end of life. That's kind of a scary topic for a lot of people. I know that if you're kind of just a normal person and you're going along with your life, thinking about death and actually what happens right before death to the body can be pretty mysterious. It can be controversial, and I think it can also be a little frightening for people. And so just to begin the conversation, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on how we approach that conversation with people?
Well, I think that, some people are really open to talking about that, and other people are not. And one of the things that we try to do through hospice and through hospice care, through the whole team, is to help people sort of normalize that process and see it as part of life. And even though it's incredibly sad for people,
Yeah.
I think understanding what people are going through, understanding what you're seeing, can really help facilitate what's happening with your loved one, And there are some real things to know about what's normal, or what's not normal,
Right.
and how we can really help people be more comfortable as they approach dying, and then through that process. Yeah.
So do you find that the more information that people have, the more comfortable they are? Or
Well, I mean,
not always?
Some people really like information, I mean, we have people we work with who tell their doctors, I don't really want to know anything,
Yeah.
Other people want to know everything. So again, it's just like approaching each person individually and seeing what they're open to. One of the things that I do is I try to let go of my agenda when I go in to work with a family, so I can really be open to where their experience is. And one of the first things I ask families when I go out to do an admission visit is, have you ever had any loved ones or friends that have been on hospice before?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a really nice way to begin with, for me, knowing, do I know that they have had some experience and they know what to expect, or this is completely new?
Yeah, where are we starting?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What are some of your experiences, or when you any memorable experiences that you've had walking into a home for the first time, and what you find there?
Gosh.
How many, right?
Yeah.
So many.
Yeah, there have been a lot of different ones. Well, I guess just off the top of my head, my very first experience was I was a fairly new nurse, and I got a call in the morning, somebody, the family member, called in real distress, and I went out to this house, and it was in this little town. And I drove up to the house, and there were all these cars pulled up in all these cattywampus positions, And so that told me right off the bat, something's going on in there. Yeah. I walked into the situation where the family met me at the door. They were really upset and really in distress, and just set my things down. It was the first death I had attended.
Wow.
And I went into the bedroom, and the woman was in bed. I'd never met her before. And her husband was at her side, and they had been married a long time, like 70 years.
Wow.
And he was holding her hand, and she was actively dying. And as I stood there, I watched her take her last breath. And it was just such a profound experience to be there for. And so that sticks in my mind,
Yeah.
and it wasn't that I did anything. I just showed up, and they were just so appreciative that somebody was able to come and witness it.
Yeah.
And then call the coroner's office, which is what we needed to do there, and stay with them while the process happened and while her body was taken, and just to support her husband, who now his whole life was going to change.
Wow.
So that one really sticks in my mind. Yeah, my very first experience.
I think it really highlights something that we talk about a lot. I'm a musician on the spiritual team with Wilshire Hospice, and we talk about this idea of presence, right? So bringing the simple act of bringing presence into the family situation. Yeah. This person can be fully alive, ready for a party, but we still need to talk about some death and dying stuff. Or they can be actively dying. They could just have passed. They could be transitioning. But the fact that we come in and we're calm, and we normalize the situation just by our presence, right? So we talk about this on the spiritual team in terms of just going in. In my case, my instrument is my voice and my guitar to serve emotionally and spiritually. And just the act of walking into the room with my guitar case and greeting whoever's there, speaking directly to the patient, even if they're not responsive, that kind of thing. It's like modeling how to be. It's modeling that this is normal. It normalizes it.
Yeah.
It totally makes sense to me how reassuring that is, just to have a nurse show up.
One of the things that I'm hearing both of you say, the word normal and normalizing
Yes.
and normality kind of over and over in this conversation. And I think that feels a lot like what we're striving for. I mean, I feel like this is a normal process. I mean, we're all going to do this, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we're all going to basically die at some point.
Yeah.
We're not getting out of it.
Even though people are reluctant to put their hand up,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I am. I'm gonna die.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
exactly.
But you said providing a calm presence, I think, even though sometimes that you don't walk into a real calm situation.
Yes.
Sometimes
Right.
it can be really a little anxiety, is going on in the room, and a person is in real distress, but bringing a calm presence, whether you feel calm or not, just putting that out there.
Right.
But you asked me if I think, if people, if they want to have information, and I think even those people who say they don't want information, if little by little we can provide bits of information to them. So as things are unfolding, they see that what's happening. Oh, that's why that's happening. Like one of the things you asked me, Steve, was some of the things that happen at the very end of
Right.
life for people, right? And recently I was with a family, and I was educating them about that, because I noticed that this person's heart rate was very, very fast, and by that I mean it was 116. And a normal heart rate is 60 to 100, and usually closer to 60, 70. And so this person's heart rate was, and I could see that her heart was beating really fast. And so what I told the family was, that doesn't mean that anything's wrong. That if we think about, all of us are living beings and our bodies are biological.
Right.
And so we strive to stay alive. And so our hearts work really hard to keep us alive, even at the very end of life. And so it's really typical for somebody's heart rate to get real fast, and also for them to get a fever. And sometimes we see people get a fever of 102, 103. And again, it doesn't mean that anything's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a response, a biological response that we have, you know.
There's nothing to fix.
There's nothing to fix.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just to be with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if the fever is causing discomfort, then we can treat the fever. Just a cool cloth on the forehead. It's just really soothing. And it gives the family something to do, right? Yeah. Because they want to do something. You know, they can't feed the person anymore, right? They're not, you know, they can maybe rub their feet, but some people don't really want to be touched a whole lot, you know. So, yeah, just laying a cool cloth on the head can be really soothing.
What you just alluded to, feeding, you know, not being able to feed the person anymore. And I think one of the things that classically we come up against in hospice work is the culture of food being so much of an important way to connect with people.
Food is love.
When food is love in our culture, in lots of different cultures, but it's a way that we can, like you say, do something. I mean, when we can't do anything else, we can't fix the person, we can't make them better. They are going to die, and when we know that in our hearts, it's something that we can, you know, please eat this or drink this special green drink, and you know you need to hydrate, Dad, or you need to stay, you know, hydrated, Mom. So talk to us a little bit about that idea, because it is, I think, very it's a very important concept, I think, for a lot of people going through this process as family.
It's true, and it's also a really it's a really common experience. Oftentimes people will continue caregivers, family members will continue to feed their loved ones even when that person isn't really interested in eating. And so if you think about it, again, going back to this idea of being a physiological, biological being, right? If our bodies are beginning a dying process, and, you know, in hospice we use the word transitioning. And transitioning can be anywhere from weeks before a death, or it can be anywhere from days before a death. But what that means is they are transitioning from being an externally focused individual to being much more internally focused. That's one piece of it. And the other is that the body is starting to change. It's beginning the dying process, okay? And so part of that is that the organs in the body, the vital organs, those of digestion, are slowing down. Mm-hmm. And if we continue to try to put food and fluids into that system that's trying to slow down, it can actually cause more suffering. Yeah. And so, again, that's another piece of education with people that I think is really important, and it's a really difficult one for people. But truly, I again, a story comes to mind where I went to meet a family at a hospital. Sometimes as hospice nurses, we'll go and we'll do an evaluation at a hospital for a family. And so this particular wife had taken her husband into the hospital, and he was there on a gurney. And he was in the ER, and I came in, and they had hooked him all up to IV fluids. And I just took one look at him and could see that these fluids were entering his body, and his body couldn't process them. And so I explained to her that probably if we turned off the fluids, he would be much more comfortable. And that's exactly what happened. So we were able to watch, and she was able to watch this, you know. Once the IV hydration stopped, this fluid dissipated from his body, and he stopped the restlessness. You know, he was much more comfortable.
That's so interesting.
So sometimes families will say, you know, can't you give IV hydration at home? And we rarely do that. Again, just because it prolongs the process. It's not to say that there aren't times when it's appropriate, you know, But I think if somebody's already entering that transitional phase, I told you that story about going to visit the family whose the wife and her husband was dying, and he was in that transitional period. And I said, I went into her porch, and we were having this conversation, and there were plants all around us. And I used this metaphor of the plants to explain to her about when she cared for her plants, and the plants were starting to die and wither, that it wouldn't do any good to just keep watering them, And she really understood that. And it really helped her let go of her husband and help him be more comfortable.
That connection to caring, that connection to nurturing. I think it's a wonderful thing that it's there right to the very end, even when sometimes it feels like, we need to back off and let go a little bit. I had an experience when I was working as a home health aide in hospice. I was taking care of an older man who's had a bunch of daughters, like 3 or 4 daughters, and his wife's around them, and he was dying. He was probably in his transition phase. He was, in fact, in his transition phase, and he every day at a certain time, his family would make him this green drink, that was energy giving, life giving, life sustaining green drink, and they would say, "Dad, it's time for your green drink now." And he was clearly miserable drinking this green drink, clearly miserable. And one day when we were in the bathroom and I was helping him with his showering, I said, why do you do this? Why do you do this to yourself? Why don't you just tell them you don't want this anymore? And he said, because it's the only thing I can do to show them how much I love them.
Those ties are so deep.
So deep.
So that was his piece of
That
acceptance.
was his piece.
Yeah.
And admittedly, he was not, in the last hours of life, but he felt like if he could do this for them, then it was something that he could give back to them.
Yeah.
I'm really hearing a lot of themes of like, if you can't do what you already know how to do with your loved one, what is there left to do, right? And I loved that image of the cold cloth on a fevered forehead, or, it's just that as we go through our lives together, we're not used to, most people maybe just sitting quietly, holding a hand or rubbing a foot or putting on some gentle music, or, I feel like we all need like a bullet list of, because I'm a doer too. Like I just want to know, like I'll go through my list, right? And if I can't do what I already know how to do, what can I do? And that whole idea of on that list, I feel like should just be being a presence, being a loving presence without expectation, without agenda to fix. I think that's really hard, but I think it's important.
Yeah, me too. It's being a human being instead of a human doing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So
Stop
it's like
the doing.
Yeah.
What
That-
was it?
right. Like, how can we just be? Because we're so used to doing all the time. And the other thing is, everybody's on their own timeline with this. It's like,
Sure.
People often, as a person's getting close, the family will just be gathered around, right? Waiting till the last breath is taken. And, I recently had a daughter say to me, what if I'm not there when she takes her last breath? And I had to say, that might happen. And that might happen because oftentimes people who are dying don't want to take their last breath with everybody near them.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to spare their loved ones from that experience, It's not even, I don't think it's even a conscious thing.
I think of it, and this is very unscientifically based, but I think of it as like that idea of the veil, right? You have the realm of the living and the realm of death, and someone is approaching the realm of death, and they have a foot on each side of the veil that separates us. And I think of it like you can see it happen, how people, as they're approaching their own death, going, more into that other side, and then they've just got their toe, still in the land of the living, and it's almost like things that pull them onto that side of the veil, the living side, like the presence of the loved ones and the stories and the pictures and the music and whatever it is from this life that they lived. I feel like at a certain point, often those don't serve anymore. And it's not about those of us who are still in the land of the living anymore. It's their own journey, intimate, personal journey, and they need to go over to that side. And it's just super interesting. I can see it happening over time.
I've also seen that very thing happen. Yeah. And I think that's why, I'll often tell families, telling them, it's okay. I'm going to be okay. Not it's okay that you're dying, because that's never going to be okay, because I'm really going to miss you. And but I'm going to be okay. Yeah. Oftentimes just that is enough for that person to be able to go. And like this family will be around the person, and hours will go by, and finally they'll just be so exhausted. They need to get a shower, they need to get a meal, and people will step out of the room, and the person will die, And so it's so interesting how that happens so much of the time. Not always, but it
does happen a lot.
A lot,
You hear it a lot anecdotally. Yeah. I think you do. It's happened in my own family at least 2 or 3 times where the people who really wanted to be there at the moment of death couldn't, and that's when it occurred.
Right. And you said this thing about stepping over into this other realm, whatever that's the mystery, it's like the big mystery. Sometimes you'll see, and I saw this with my mom as she was getting close to dying. She was reaching her hands up into the corner of the room and looking up into the corner. And I said, "What do you see, Mom? What's up there?" And she said, "Look at her. Look at her. She's dancing." And and it was just so beautiful, and I said, "Who is it?" And she
tell us, please.
Yeah,
we want to know.
We want to know.
Yeah, it was this little sister of hers who had died when she was 2. It was just so sweet. I was with a patient down in Pismo, and at his bedside, and he was doing that, sort of this hallucinating, and I asked him, "What do you see?" And he said, "I see stagecoaches." And his wife looked at me, and she just thought, "Stagecoaches?" I'm like, "You just never know, you know? Yeah, it's just such a mystery.
How common is that, Susan? I mean, you hear that a lot about people. I hate to say, I mean, hallucinating. I guess that's what it is, really, technically. But it also feels sometimes visionary in some ways. I mean,
who are we to know?
Right.
Is it a hallucination or is it a contact?
Yeah. Medication. I guess it could be medication at some point too. But it's it probably doesn't matter in the long run. But talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think of hallucination, I mean, medically, as seeing something that others can't see.
Right.
Whatever that is. And again, that's not it is, again, it's one of those pieces of education for families, because it's a very common experience. And if you know that that's what's happening, then it causes less distress.
Right.
Now, sometimes hallucinations are distressful.
Yeah.
And sometimes they cause a lot of fear and anxiety and agitation. And in that case, we use tools, medications, other types of non-pharmaceutical things to help calm that person down. Right. So that's a little different, that can sometimes happen with veterans who have never processed, or people have never processed trauma. Sometimes that trauma can resurface.
Yeah, what can you say to somebody who's undergoing that kind of distress, hallucination distress, or end of life agitation type of thing? I mean, in addition to the medication and the interventions that you can do, what can you actually say to somebody in that case?
Well, Well, I mean, there's not one pat answer, but I think, again, providing a calm presence is really important. Taking that person's hand and saying, you're safe. I'm here with you. You're safe. It's okay. I'm here. And just keep repeating that. How can I help? You know, some people, whatever it is, you know, in their life that they've used to calm them. Sometimes it's a ball game playing on the television. Sometimes it's music. It could be different smells or incense or no touch at all. You know, I think we use the medications when non-medication stuff isn't working.
Right.
Yeah, and then that can be really helpful to calm them down. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question. I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And if you're just arriving, this is Before I Die with Steve Willey. My name is Yanana Rozovich, and we are here today with hospice nurse Susan Quinones, and we are talking about what happens to the body when we die. And I know, Susan, we touched a little bit on food and hydration. I'd love it if you could talk a bit about pain management, and then, you know, anything else, of course, that occurs to you.
Yeah, pain. Well, I think that, you know, when people say, I'm not afraid to die, I'm just afraid of what might happen when I'm dying, they're usually talking about pain.
Yeah.
And so there's so many good tools to manage pain. I mean, from medications to experiencing the pain instead of trying to get away from it. You know, I think we're really pain averse in our society, and so, but so, you know, I mean, if somebody can tell you that they're experiencing pain, it's a major piece of hospice care, of palliative care. In general, is to manage symptoms, and one of those is pain. So it's something that we always ask all the time whenever we visit patients is, you know, are you in any pain? Now, some people, the word pain itself, they'll say no, you know, and then if you say, do you have any discomfort? Oh gosh, yeah, you know. So different people use different words for pain. So you have to kind of learn what their words are. You know, it could be like, I'm having a session today. You know, just different languaging for pain. We have some really great tools, though, out there from the use of medications. Typically, hospice nurses, whichever hospice it is, sort of nationally and internationally, will use the phrase comfort medications. And so those consist of pain medications, medications for anxiety, medications to keep bowels still functioning, medications for agitation if needed, and for then at the very end of life, that medication for that really noisy breathing that people hear sometimes. So yeah, we have a lot of good tools for pain management. It depends on what type of pain it is, and it doesn't always have to be a pain medication that addresses that. You know, using a medication for anxiety, if we can get the body to relax, the pain will relax, right? Because our tendency is to want to tighten up when we have pain. And so again, it's sort of a contraction. So if we can think of it as, how can I open up to this and relax around it, sometimes the pain will relax. So it just, it's very individual, but it's a big part of hospice nursing for sure.
I'm really reminded of a patient that I had recently, and his caregiver was so just intuitive and I think experienced as well. She had been a caregiver for other people at the end of life, but the person who was our patient was her uncle, and she had brought him across country on a flight, and then they had a wonderful week together, and then he passed away. But he was in a living situation that was very uncomfortable and uncared for, where he was. And so when he came here, his body just started letting go in all of these different ways and sort of unbinding itself. And she really recognized this as exactly what needed to happen for him to become relaxed enough, essentially, to die. And that's what happened. And the way that she described it, I was just so struck by that. And we do see this, I think, with patients a lot, where particularly if pain or some kind of an anxiety and unresolved emotional issue can be fixed or, sufficiently addressed, they can relax and then they can die.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary to me.
I think that also has a lot to do with how death and medication are perceived to, one follows the other. I mean, I've heard lots of stories. In fact, in my own family, there was a concern that giving pain medication might be the cause of, our loved one's death. And I think what Yanana is saying, and I'm sure that you had experiences with this like daily, probably, that just that relaxation, that letting go, that physical ability to not have to focus on the symptoms so hard and so tightly allows the body and the psyche and the soul, if you will, to just relax and let go and not have to, fight so hard.
Yeah.
To feel safe, I guess, is how I think about it.
Yeah, there's this misconception, I think, that once we start using those comfort meds, that's when things are really going to change. And, that may be the case. However, I also would say that for so many people, once they start using those comfort medicines, their quality of life improves so much. And I have never seen somebody die from receiving morphine or other medicines in that comfort kit. I've only seen people be able to relax into the process of dying. And that's how I explain it to families. That morphine is an amazing medication. It's very, very old. We have naturally occurring, very similar chemicals in our own bodies. And so that's why it's so effective. And it really helps relax the respiratory system and relax any kind of pain that people are having. And again, like that holding and that tension that we do.
Yeah.
And I think, your whole point of doing this Before I Die series is let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Because if we can, if we can just talk about it.
Why not?
Yeah.
And prepare as well, just by thinking about it, keeping it, we have a saying, keeping death on our left shoulder, that it's just always there with us. This could be my last day. Am I living it well?
It's so clear to me because even with the experience of my dad's death and even with me being in the hospice field and knowing what I do, my sister is in healthcare. My mom was so reluctant to give my dad any kind of pain medication, mainly because she just wanted him to be as alert as possible so that we could communicate with him and that sort of thing. But but the information that we finally were able, like us and the hospice nurse, when she came out, we were all able to finally talk about it enough with her to educate her enough to know that this isn't, that doesn't not going to preclude him communicating with us. It's just going to make him more comfortable, breathe easier. He didn't appear to be in any pain, but he was having difficulty breathing a little bit, and that really helped him relax. It was almost a miracle the way from 1 minute to the next, how just a teeny little bit of medication was able to just completely change his demeanor.
Yeah, it can be really helpful.
It's also sort of that chicken and egg thing too. Like I think the way you phrased it was that misconception that when the comfort medicines are brought on, that's when everything starts to change. And I would say when everything starts to change is when you're going to ask the nurse about the comfort meds.
Right.
And so you're there already. Yeah. And it's a matter of, okay, now how can we do this?
Right. And when I go out and do an admission for somebody, most always I will say, I'm going to order these medications just so we have them. Yeah, because my motto is always, it's better to have it and not need it than to need them and not have them.
You don't want to be waiting on that prescription. for
Exactly,
pharmacy.
you know, and or
over the weekend.
Right, Friday night, midnight, you know, and we don't have what we need. So it's just knowing that tool is available, you know, and we may never use it. And some people may never have to use it, but for a lot of people it is really helpful. Yeah. And this whole idea about pain too, and pain medication, I mean, you know, we've had a terrible problem in our culture with addiction to opioids, and so a lot of people are really reluctant about using them. And it's really unfortunate in that sense, because for hospice, it's such a different thing. Addiction never comes into the picture, you know, and anyway, it's.
And it's probably important to, I think both of you have mentioned how individual this is. I think it's also important to mention that some people, as you said, Susan, have different ideas about what pain is and what's acceptable. And I know there are people who they more or less want to experience, or they feel like they need to, for whatever reason, experience higher levels of pain, and they don't really want to medicate themselves as much for whatever reason too. So,
and that's okay too, you know. But what I mean, we have these questions we ask people about, you know, what is your pain level, and then the next question is, what's tolerable to you? Because somebody could say my pain level is an 8, right? But what's tolerable to me is a 5. Somebody else, their pain level's 5 and 0 is tolerable, you know? So it really, and we work with so many people in their 80s and 90s, and they're such a stoic generation. So stoic. It's like, no, not wimps, wimps at all.
No, not wimps.
So getting that person to tell you that's the person that says, I'm kind of having a session in my back today. a little discomfort,
a little pinch,
a little pinch. Yeah.
That was my dad. He had a little bit of dementia, but he was really, really clear about saying, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm okay.
Right. Well, and that you touched on something really important, Steve. And so that's with dementia, you know. We have so many people now coming down with Alzheimer's and different types of dementia. And it's a little scary, actually, about how many people, and we are seeing more and more of them on hospice care. So knowing how to read pain signs, you know, with somebody who can't tell you is really important.
Yeah.
And there are some really clear, some clear indicators. So one of the things is, you know, if you notice when somebody's hurting, typically they'll do this, you know, they'll scrunch up their face. And so we could call it grimacing, you know. I often tell families, look around the eyes, you know, because if they scrunch their eyes, that means there's something going on, you know. So that's one thing to watch for. Another is a change in breathing, you know. If a person's just breathing normally and relaxed, generally not having a lot of difficulty. But if they're having some discomfort and pain, their breathing will change. So that's another thing. And another thing we teach families is watch for signs of restlessness, because when people are in pain, they fidget. They can't get comfortable. So they're just moving almost all the time, trying to get comfortable, you know. So even if a person's saying, I'm fine, right? But they're fidgeting and they're grimacing and they're, you know, then we know that they're not fine.
No.
So there are other ways we can see that.
That was one of my questions about if someone is non-responsive, particularly towards the very end of life, how can you assess whether or not they're comfortable?
Yeah,
it sounds like a lot of that would be applicable.
Yeah. And so many things you can do by positioning the patient, you know, and that's why we often will say to families, I know they really wanted to die in their own bed, but having a hospital bed is so much more helpful. It's so hard
for the caregivers.
For the caregivers too, and usually for the person, because it's so hard to get somebody comfortable in a big king size bed. Flat, right? Yeah. Where with a hospital bed, you can get on both sides of them. You can roll them over. They can use the railings to help pull themselves over. You know, and one of the most effective things to help people at the very end of life when you hear that really noisy breathing is to have them lay flat and roll way over on their side. And sort of like if you think of that old rescue position and from first aid training,
absolutely.
that's it,
Yeah.
you know. And so you roll them way over on their side and prop that top leg over on a pillow, and the breathing just smooths out. And it's really amazing, you know.
Wow.
And it's our instinctually, we want to keep people in a sitting upright in this bed, you know, and all these secretions are just gathering here at the top of their throat, and they are the bottom of their throat, and they can't get rid of them.
So that noisy breathing has a very bad reputation.
Does.
It's a really bad,
It's a terrible name.
all throughout history, and it has a
Yeah.
horrible name.
Yeah.
What should we know about that?
Yeah, we just call it excessive secretions and noisy breathing. You know, people have called it the death rattle, which it's like, yeah, okay, you know.
Very dramatic.
But yeah, I mean, again, what's going on is that you're losing strength and function of the vital organs, right? So you know, I'm clearing my throat as I'm talking with you, you know, and we're moving, and so we're able to do that. Well, if somebody is becoming more and more immobile and spending most of their time in a reclined position, those secretions that they would typically be coughing or clearing their throat, it's not happening.
Right.
So they just kind of collect there, you know. And so, so that's why that happens. And they collect in the upper airways and top of the throat. And the thing that I need to remind people about is that it may sound horrible, but it's usually not causing any distress to the person experiencing it.
Right.
But again, if we can get them to lay on their side, way down flat, you know, which seems like, what, you want me to lay them flat? You know, then you'll hear the breathing just really smooth out. I don't know about you, but I like sleeping on my side. It's really comfy.
I have been told by experts that if I'm on my side, I am not going to snore as much.
Yeah, I think it opens
or
up
breathe
space, right?
wetly. But if I'm on my back, all bets are off.
Yeah, well, and the mouth opens.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody, thank you for joining us. And if you're just tuning in, this is Before I Die with Steve Willey. I'm Yanana Rozovich, and we are here today with Susan Quinones, a wonderful hospice nurse, and talking about what happens to our body when we die. And I have a kind of an off-topic question for you, Susan. I'm really curious why, when you said that when you studied nursing and then you just graduated, you knew that you wanted to go into home health and hospice. And I'm so curious as to why.
Oh, I guess because hospitals scare me.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. That's a good answer.
I just, I really like the autonomy of being out in people's homes. I was so fortunate, you know, oftentimes you graduate from nursing school and they'll say you have to do a year in med surg before you can, you know, get into any other. But I was really fortunate in that I joined a VNA hospice program in Appalachia in Southern Ohio, and the person who mentored me had been doing the work for 30 years. Wow. And she
doing what kind of work?
Home health and hospice. Yeah, both. They like we used to do in our county. It was joined together, you know, and then they sort of separated out. So she taught me everything she knew. I was with her for like 6 months, and I got a great training from her. And so that's, I don't know, you know,
you liked it.
I liked
right
it
out of the gate.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
awesome.
I've done other types of nursing, but just never done hospital nursing. And I don't know, I feel like you know, hospice nursing for me is definitely it's a calling, it's a career, it's not just a job, and it's my niche.
Yeah, it absolutely
you know,
is.
comfortable talking about death.
Yeah.
It's, well,
That's why you're here.
that's why I'm here, I guess.
That is why you're here.
Yeah.
I have before we let you go or finish. I'm not sure where we are in this conversation yet, but
We can't let her go yet.
We can't let her go.
Yeah, not quite.
And I talking a little bit about what happens to the body at the end of life. How do people know when to call hospice? I mean,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you could recommend to people that they look for if they're thinking about this?
Because you said sometimes you go in and evaluate.
Yeah,
Right.
So yeah, what is that process?
Right. Well, I started doing home health when I moved out here with our company. And what I noticed was that so many of my patients were elderly. They had chronic conditions, and they were going in and out of the hospital constantly. And nobody was ever asking them, do you want to continue to go to the hospital to treat this?
Yeah.
And so I started asking people, and they started saying, no, I really don't. I would much rather stay home. And I'd say, there's a way we can do that. It's so interesting. So that was 15 years ago, right? Now I think that it's become much more, it's become more acceptable, more normalized to talk about hospice, even though for some people it's still very difficult to hear that word. They really associate it with, this means it's it.
That's it.
I'm giving up. There's nothing more to do, all of that, but I think how one of the newest ways that people can find out if they suspect, that say they have a parent who is elderly and they notice that this parent, maybe they've had a recent fall and or more infections of one type or another. They're not eating as much. They don't seem as as vibrant or interested. That they can ask that person's doctor, would you be surprised if my mom died within 6 months? And it's just a really straightforward question that you can ask of the doctor. Now, not every doctor is going to feel comfortable saying, I would not be surprised. But actually, I think a lot of doctors would welcome that question because it gives them an opportunity to say, you know what, honestly, no, I wouldn't be surprised.
And that also removes some of the burden of their prognostication, which they don't like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
They
and
don't
it's
a lot
not
of pressure.
It's not easy
No.
to form a prognosis. And
Right.
and the ironic thing is, once a person comes onto hospice care, if they come on early enough, like within that first last 6 months of life, they oftentimes have such a better quality of life. And they can stay on hospice longer than 6 months. That's the other sort of myth that's out there. It's like, people can stay on longer. Sometimes they stay on for a year or two. With some of those chronic diseases, it's really difficult to tell. And it looks like somebody is actually really failing because they've had this series of things happen.
Yeah.
But then once they get all the support in from nursing and social work and music and spiritual care and a bath aid, those people that really support them, they actually feel better. And their quality of life improves, and maybe the length of life improves too. But I think it's a simple enough question to say to people.
Like
doctors have these prognostication tools that they use for various diseases, and none of them are foolproof. So this is just kind of a gut feeling, from the. But it also is up to the person. It's like, even if the doctor doesn't necessarily agree, a hospice referral can come from a family who's really seeing a decline. It can come from a patient. And then once the hospice team goes out and evaluates, sometimes they see things with a different set of eyes, They've also found out that, if a physician has been with a patient for a long, long period of time, as in like 20 years or so, that physician is much less likely to see that patient's demise.
Wow.
Because they're attached to the patient, So sometimes another set of eyes coming in and looking can say, actually. So
that feels like that's true for all of us as family members and loved ones too, because I know I was the last person. I mean, the hospice nurse that came out to evaluate my dad immediately put him on hospice, and I was like no.
And, you've been doing this work
and
for
I've
like
been doing
30
this
years.
for 30 years. And I thought,
Yeah.
no, he's going to end up like, we're going to be recertifying him for the next 5 years.
Right.
And, this is horrible. He's not, and I was told that under no certain terms to just step back and let the hospice people do their job. And he was gone in a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, it's much harder. I mean, I went through that with both my parents as well.
Yeah.
Much harder when you're attached emotionally. For sure. And so I think it's really helpful to doctors, to families, to other people to be able to go in and say, actually, here's what I see, and I may be wrong. And who knows? We may graduate this person off a hospice in 6 months.
Yeah, we have people go off. Often.
That does happen. That does happen.
Yeah, it has happened. Yeah. It's hard to know sometimes.
So, Susan, the $64,000 question. Do you think it's possible, as after this whole conversation we've had today, do you think it's possible to normalize death and dying? Or talking about it.
Thinking about it.
I think just the fact that we're doing this, Steve, is a good indicator that it is becoming a more typical conversation for people.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely, I'm seeing all kinds of signs about that, in the last 10 years. So it is shifting. It's like everything is just like slow as molasses, but it's shifting. Okay. So yeah, I do. I think that as so many of us start aging and are aging, right, Steve? You and I are there.
Happy to be there.
Yeah, that our generation, we're the ones that were like, no, we're going to do it our way. And we're the ones that are really talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it is shifting and becoming more normalized.
That's very hopeful.
Yeah.
And I see it coming from different realms too, like you're two professionals with a lot of years behind you. So you're, I'm assuming, maybe seeing that shift in people who are coming on. You work in community education around death and dying. So you can tell, how receptive people are now versus before. And I am on social media a lot because of my music career. And I just learned I'm sure there are a number of them, but I just learned of a TikTok account from a hospice nurse who has something like 14 million followers or something. Yeah. I mean, a lot of followers, right? And she does these, quick little videos and people will contact her for very literal, information. Talk about the end of life breathing. Yep. What's going on with the end of life medication. My mom's not sure if she should come on top. And she'll just go blah, 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 post it onto TikTok and she'll have hundreds of thousands of people paying attention to that. And I think it's brilliant. It's just wherever the information comes from, that it just needs to come. We just need to have it. I feel like our culture has left us bereft of knowledge that's so important. I mean, it's something that I really feel so strongly about. Like, we don't have, death is no longer in our living rooms. Right. We didn't take care of anybody. Right. We don't know what happens. And then all of a sudden we are expected to be the caregivers of this really, really important thing. Right. And we have no knowledge of it. Right. So yes, call in a team. Absolutely. That needs to happen. But I think that people are just wanting to be more informed. I feel like people feel unconsciously at least a bit robbed of that fundamental human knowledge of the cycles of it, the generations of it. Yeah.
And we are so just about out of time at this point.
This is fun.
What if somebody wanted to send in a question or something? Is there a way for them to do that?
Please do send your questions, your comments into the comment section below. We will take a look at those, and whoever can answer them best will have that person answer that question for you.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. This is Before I Die. My name is Yanana Rose Zovich. This is Steve Willey, and we're going to be doing this exact kind of a thing every third Thursday at noon. They will usually be live, YouTube live, and also posted on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Wilshire Health and Community Services. We will be here next month on June 15th at noon with Sean Allen Murphy from Right Brain Money, talking about estate and financial planning and all sorts of other fun things. We hope you can join us for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah,
this has
thanks.
been really fun.
Yeah.
It's fun hanging out with
It's
you.
been great. Good
Always
conversation.
Nice seeing you here, Yanana, too. So
Yeah, we're having a good time.
Yep. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you next month.